Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of I Like to Read with me, your host, Rachel Polanski. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Sam J. Miller. Sam J. Miller's books have been called must reads and bests of the year by publications such as USA Today, Entertainment Weekly, NPR, and the Oprah Magazine. He is the Nebula Award winning author of Blackfish City. Sam's short stories have won a Shirley Jackson Award as well as various other awards, and he is also the last in a long line of butchers. So, welcome, Sam.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you on. So, my first question for you is: have you always loved to write, or is that a more recent passion of yours?
No, I've always loved to write. I trace my origin story, my villain origin story,
Yeah.
is that when I was in second grade, I was really unpopular. I didn't have many friends. I was very bad at sports. Being good at sports is very important. And so what I did have is I was really good at telling extravagant fibs. And I went to a farm school where most of the other students did not even own a television, let alone have access to horror movies. So I would tell them I had seen horror movies that I hadn't actually seen, but they didn't know that. And I could spread it out. I was like very Scheherazade about it, spreading it out from day to day and week to week. And it's telling these like extravagant, ridiculous lies. So yeah, that's how I got started as a writer, is telling lies so people would like me. And that's pretty much what I do to this day. My mom is a great writer. She taught me how to write a cover letter and a self-addressed stamped envelope when I was 12. So I've been submitting stories to magazines since I was 12. So yeah, a while.
I mean, I don't think those were lies so much as you were interpreting. It's like what are stories if not, there was probably a lot of those horror movies were just interpretations of other stories that have come down through the pipeline. So in a way, you were giving them the kid friendly version or the
Oh, it was definitely
I was
not.
gonna say slightly maybe
Yeah. Yeah,
friendly.
I mean, I imagine there were at least a couple of them who years later finally watched Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and were shocked to find it had no tigers in it.
And that's
Um,
hilarious.
but yeah, yeah. What are stories but fibs? And what are fibs but stories?
Exactly. And even nonfiction, sometimes the line there can definitely be blurred. What's it like to explore and publish in different genres, as well as break the pigeonhole of, one specific genre type writer? Like, I wouldn't classify you so much as you're not a sci-fi writer, you're not a horror writer, you're someone who has written in these genres.
Yeah, I'm a little all over the place. And I think it just comes down to me being really bad at genre. Like I tend to think I'm writing in this genre and then I finish it and find out, no, it's actually this other genre. But I have a lot of fun with it. I read a lot in a lot of genres. I do try to read a lot of science fiction, fantasy, and horror because those are kind of my faves. But I also read a lot of thrillers, detective novels, historical fiction, nonfiction. So I want to do all the things. I want to try all the things. So it's very liberating to feel like you can go wherever you want. And then maybe sometimes you get told you can't, or you get there. It's like, no, maybe you didn't do so well with this one, Sam. But yeah, it's fun. That often you hear that the strategic thing is to pick a thing and stick to it if you want to have like a linear career or build an audience over time, and that's probably true. But it hasn't been my goal. Yeah, I want to have fun. So that's why I'm all over the place.
I think that definitely, that avoids then the pigeonholing as when you're maybe taking the inspiration to start from certain tropes of a genre, but then you're playing with it and molding it. And I think that's what's really cool and unique about your writing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I also love thrillers. I love horror. I love dark stories. What are some of your favorites, either from childhood or also more contemporary inspirations, even, things that may have come out after you worked on your books, but anything recently, what's been inspiring you? What fuels you?
Everything. We're in such a great moment for science fiction and fantasy and horror, especially by queer folks and people of color and women. So yeah, it's an exciting moment. I mean, historically, my biggest influences have been Octavia Butler, and Ted Chiang and Ray Bradbury. But nowadays, like, there's so much great stuff. Samuel Delaney, N.K. Jemisin, Alyssa Wong, Usman Malik, Paul Tremblay. There's a billion. There's so many great writers that are out and publishing right now. I was just a judge for the Shirley Jackson Awards this year, which was really fun and a real big honor and involved reading a ton of stuff. And so I'm really jazzed up on horror right now. I had exposure to so much of what's happening in horror now. So yeah, there's some good horrifying times make for good horror, I think.
Very, very true. Definitely some of the best horror is reflective of the times, but playing with it in a unique way. Speaking of horror, one of my horror nightmares is being raised in a family of butchers because I am a longtime vegetarian, and I know you are a vegetarian as well. But tell me a little bit about what it was like to grow up in a family of butchers, and then also about your switch to vegetarianism.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it was really magical. We had a small town family butcher shop that had been in the family for several generations. And, it was also one of the main places that people got their food in my town. So I was like the butcher shop prince. And I felt like I had this little world where I was special. And when I turned 12, my father, like, one Saturday morning was like, "You're coming to work with me," and he put me to work, and he trained me in being a butcher. And so I really loved it. I think it's a thing I don't want to say it's gone now, but the idea of a small town butcher who plays an important role in the community is endangered these days when most people get their meat from a chain supermarket. And in fact, it was endangered then because we got put out of business in 1996 when Walmart came to town. Mm-hmm. And so then I was really angry, and I was a young punk communist rager, and I just got tired of eating meat that we were buying from the people who had put us out of business. And I was also crushed out on some really hot vegan boys, and I wanted them to like me. So I was 18 when I became a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian for 25 years now. My father, to his great credit, took it really well. Wow. Basically, within a month of each other, I came out to him as gay and a vegetarian, which many fathers in his position would have reacted not so well to. But he found both those things hilarious.
That's pretty funny. It's like, you can love whoever you want to love, but if you're choosing to not eat what we love, that's probably the bigger issue. But I don't come from a family of butchers, but I'm the only vegetarian in my family or life, and I'm sort of the volition where it's like, you guys can do what you want, but don't preach your vows or your values on me. How does your queer impact? Words don't come easy to me, as the famous song says. How does your queer identity impact your writing and your storytelling?
Short answer, I don't know. Long answer, I could spend probably hours postulating. I mean, I think it's everything. It informs everything about who I am and what I say and do and how I move in the world and what my art is. I always say that being queer is a superpower. It gives you like supernatural insights into the world. Like there's lots of things that if I had been straight, I probably would never have realized about how the world works and how gender works and how patriarchy exists, and what the sort of expectations that gender pushes on you, how those impact and limit and harm people. It's my superpower, and it is something that I think feeds my fiction in a huge way, because these are the stories that are like, that really excite me. Those, like the stories that sort of dig into the meat of what it means to be a queer person and in a homophobic world, those are the stories that I think come alive for me the most. So when my debut novel came out, The Art of Starving, in 2017, it was actually my seventh novel, because I had written 6 novels before that nobody wanted. And in retrospect, there were a lot of reasons for that, and maybe some of them weren't so good. But a lot of it was that I was convinced that telling queer stories wouldn't be welcome in publishing, and that it would be hard to connect with straight audiences if you're telling gay stories. And so for many years I tried not to tell them, and it wasn't until I like said F that, I want to tell the stories that are most burning and alive for me, that I really not only did the fiction come alive, but I was able to like find an audience and get published. And so yeah, I'm nothing without my queerness.
Do you think that there was a specific moment around 2017 or like a specific wave that sort of ushered in this comfortability for you? Or did it sort of just happen to naturally coincide with your own sort of internal work and identity?
I think it was a lot of things. I think the book, I wrote the book in 2014, sold it in 2015, but really the big transformative moment for me as a writer was in 2012 when I went to the Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop and studied with a bunch of amazing writers and found a community of science fiction and fantasy and horror writers. And it was then that I started to sort of see that there are tons of queer artists, and maybe they're not like the number one bestsellers, but they are writing amazing stories that
Right.
are really powerful and vivid and coming to life, and finding audiences. And so that's when I started to feel like, oh, I can write those stories. And that's when I started to sell to some of the markets that had been closed to me before, and be able to, get some award nominations, get an award win, get some attention from agents, be in a position after years of struggling to find an agent, be in a position to have multiple agents offering representation, and to be able to be a little bit picky about it. Yeah, I think community is everything. That's the other superpower, that changed my life, is being able to like be buddies with other writers who are coming from marginalized backgrounds, but not letting it stop them from not letting publishing's biases stop them from telling their stories.
Oh, I love that. That's really special. So we're going to shift more into your book, Blackfish City, which came out in 2018, but takes place in a futuristic time in society that could kind of be very realistic. It's very cyberpunk. I know you talked a lot already about how much you love sci-fi, but was that love always more cyberpunk? What are some of your inspirations for the world of Blackfish City?
I think so. I kind of feel like cyberpunk is like imposter syndrome, is that we all mean something different when we talk about it, but we all know what, like, it means something to us. So, in retrospect, yeah, I think the things that I really love stories about cities. I really love science fiction that sort of explores the gritty, like, I'm not so concerned about the scientist in the skyscraper as I am about the, hustler, the rent boy
Right.
on the corner, right? So I think that often cyberpunk is used to mean a lot of tropes about, like, people who are struggling to get by on the margins of a semi-dystopian urban environment. So, William Gibson is one of my favorite writers. So there's a lot of William Gibson's DNA here. The Paolo Bacigalupi's The Wind-Up Girl is an interesting and really good, I think, antecedent for like what climate futures can look like. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's also like, I steal from a lot of places, and I find that the best stealing comes from, like, if you're going to write science fiction, don't steal from science fiction because everyone will clock you. So like, there's a major plot line in Blackfish City that comes from a novel called The Swimming Pool Library, which is one of my favorite novels, but is like a 1980s literary British queer, gay fiction story, that's not science fiction or fantasy or horror, and so but has this really interesting plot about this boy who's sort of born into unimaginable privilege, and whose grandfather did some ill shit to get there, to get that privilege, and who meets an older man who is actually, unbeknownst to him, a victim of his grandfather's past, and who might be planning a horrific revenge, of which he is the target. So yeah, it's a lot of cyberpunk, but it's also just a lot of stuff, from all kinds of genres.
And isn't that kind of what cyberpunk is too? Because like it's always sort of like looking ahead to the future by taking amalgamations of the past, but everyone has their own interpretations of what's futuristic and what's not. Like, I don't know, I got my mom a digital photo frame for her birthday a couple weeks ago, thinking that would be like a nice gift. And she's not that old. She's like, she just turned 60. She was like, she didn't even bother to try to learn with the technology. And I'm like, I guess, framed photos are not necessarily a thing of the past by any means, but I think it's evolving towards physical media in general is completely disappearing. And we're sort of seeing the gap where like I still collect certain books and DVDs, but I just don't have the physical space to hold all of them. And I think too, like the idea of minimalism and maximalism, and I've heard of horrors. I mean, when I go back to my parents and their houses, the idea of just like physical, tangible things and digital things shifting as part of that, I think a big reason that happens is because of climate change and because of the way that we are destroying the earth. And this book came out a little over 4 years ago, I think, right? And it's still, a lot of this stuff feels very present, but a lot has changed. And so how do you see the attitude towards climate change having evolved or not evolved since you came out with this book?
I don't know. There was a while where I was starting to feel hopeful, but I'm not feeling hopeful right now.
Yes.
There was like the Greta moment. There was a mass awareness and mass mobilizations by young people around the world. And then during the pandemic, it was like, oh, well, if we can do all this stuff, if we're capable of this kind of sudden transformative change at great cost to ourselves, sure, maybe we can. Yeah, no, we're not capable of. So yeah, I am now as pessimistic as I was when I wrote Blackfish City. In fact, probably substantially more so. I one of my sort of pandemic transformations was, I feel like I was able to connect with nature a lot more, even though I live in New York City where there's not a ton of nature, but there's a lot. And so like I live by the river. And so watching plants change over time and the way things grow and the sort of like patience and resilience of plants, I was able to have a much deeper appreciation for. So yeah, they're all being murdered. So
Yeah, it's terrible.
The more you connect with nature, the sadder you get, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, I'm in LA and I'm similar. I live like right in the heart of the city, and there is a park that's like 7 minutes away. And I go there quite often. There's a hiking trail, and it's like this really gorgeous part of land in the middle of the city. But then it's just very brown, and there's a lot of trash sometimes, and just the drought and the rising gas prices too. Like I am from the East Coast, and I was recently back home, and it felt like I was time traveling, honestly, because I'm used to I got used to the taxes pretty quickly out here, but the gas prices are still like, it's almost $6. Like the cheapest gas is like $5.50, and I'm pretty sure on the East Coast it's still like under $4. So you probably don't know. So you're in New York City.
Privileged by the subway and my bicycle to not buy gas.
Yeah, I could tell you, it's just being of horror stories. I have a whole thing against bikes, and I don't know how to ride one because I was run over by one. But that's a story for another time. How did you create such a rich cityscape and immersive world?
Well, it's a very there's a urban policy and planning think tank in New York City that read Blackfish City for its book club group, and they invited me to discuss it with them, and they were like, this is New York City, right? So yeah, it's New York City. I think a lot of the things that that are really vivid for me about New York ended up just being part of the DNA of Connacht. But also, like, I saw Akira, which is one of my favorite movies, and I saw it for like the 1,000th time as I was writing in the early stages of writing this. And so I think that there's a lot of that in there. So yeah, a lot of fictional cities, but also just a lot of like my own strong feelings about New York City, poorly disguised.
Yeah, I just saw the thing about they were like saying, oh, we're only going to take the trash out on certain time, whatever, something. I mean, it's like, it's always kind of a joke. New York City is sort of like the prototypical city. It's the metropolis, and it's whenever they do something. I mean, LA is behind you guys, but you guys have you take the cake for some of the wackiest city stuff. Yeah. But you do have the subway though. You don't have to deal with the freeways and the traffic.
Yep.
Did the book always focus on multiple characters, or is that something that sort of came about as you were writing it?
No, that was definitely the only way to tell this story. I mean, I really love, like, in novels, I love sort of getting the, seeing the whole picture through a number of different perspectives, ideally really different ones. So like a very rich person and a very poor person, a male-bodied person and a non-binary person, an old person and a young person. I find that sort of diversity of perspectives makes the story feel more rich and the world feel more alive. So yeah, that was definitely the only way to tell this story, especially since it all sort of circles around this character of the Orcomancer, who doesn't herself speak very much. She only has one chapter of POV. So, seeing her as through other people's eyes, sort of like if I can be pretentious, Citizen Kane thing of like, we don't actually get much of Citizen Kane. We just get 4 different people's impressions of him, and they're very different.
Yeah, can you talk more about the decision to have this character that was so in tune with animals, and obviously the intentionality of, specifically an orca and a polar bear?
I can't, because I don't really, know where she came from. She just showed up one day in my head and was like, write me. I didn't know really exactly who she was, just that she had an orca, and she was a badass. And so it took me a while to figure out, to assemble the story around her. So, she just seemed like, amazing. I really liked her. She seemed really scary. A lot of there's usually relationships with animals are important to my fiction. I have a tattoo for every book. And the tattoo is always an animal from the book, because there's usually something important there. Because I think we often, it's easy for people to lose track of the personhood of animals and to see animals as things that exist to serve or be destroyed by or whatever humans. So trying to center animals and non-human animals as subjects is whenever I can do that, I'm happy.
Yes, I love, and my cat is literally sitting right next to me. So big fan of animals. And I really like that too, where it's like, yes, we can develop these insane bonds with them and they can have just as much importance as humans. And they're a big part of nature that we forget about and take for granted. So do you see a future where Canuck is real?
I mean, I definitely see a future where rising sea levels displace hundreds of millions of people. I don't know whether I'm confident that I see a future where we can get our shit together enough to make floating cities before it's too late. I do see that there will be, maybe not exactly that, but probably not the US, but plenty of countries who are not so resolutely avoiding assessing what's to come will probably, by forethought or by necessity, create new solutions. And so I think the ways in which the future is gonna scare the shit out of us are wild and many, but also the ways in which people will come up with some cool ideas and cool technology and cool solutions, hopefully. So if not this, something else equally bleak.
Right. I think the level of planning and foresight is, I don't know if we can get too on top of that, but I could see it maybe evolving to something like that. What does your futuristic utopia look like?
I think that a lot of people call Blackfish City a dystopia, and I think I fundamentally don't believe in dystopias or utopias. I think that right now in New York City, there's lots of people who are living in utopia, who live, who are unimaginably wealthy and live super comfortable lives, and many more people who are living in a dystopia. I spent 15 years working with homeless people, and that's dystopia. Like the reality of homeless folks living on the street is as bad as anything in The Walking Dead. I would love to and I think that that's sort of like been the case at every point in human history, that there's like a small number of people who are in utopia and a large number of people who are in dystopia. And I have a hard time imagining a future where that's not the case. So I think a less dystopic future would be one where like we've been able to like act to make changes on the ways we're destroying the planet and animal life, but also just like to address the fundamental like injustices and inequities of the world, like to address racism, to address gender oppression. Yeah, like I feel like we have the capacity to be better, if not utopian. So yeah, one where we're not sliding into horrific fascism would be a good start.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You put it very out. Like, that was a really good answer. Basically,
Thank
it's
you.
like very good answer. Like you left me at a loss for words almost. How do you think that the younger generations can embrace social justice through art and action and find ways to make impactful changes?
I don't know, and I'll let them figure that out. I mean, one of
Valid,
the
yeah.
reasons why I got out of community organizing was because I realized that the energy and excitement that I had when I was a young person for social change are they don't. It's not that they go away; it's that they change, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that I write young adult, and so I have I've had plenty of opportunities to interact with young people to talk about my work, but also about the issues in my books. And so I'm always blown away by the ways in which young people are are smarter, more sophisticated, more aware, more passionate, more convinced in the possibility of change than I was at their age. So yeah, I don't know, but I want to get out of their way and let them do it. I take a lot of excitement and inspiration from that.
Yeah, I think it's hard to understand. Like you forget, when you were even 18 or younger teenager, like you think, oh, I'm never gonna, when I'm old, I'm gonna think the same way. But stuff happens and it's impossible to think the same way. And that, you're right, that drive and that energy, it doesn't necessarily go away, but the way that unless you're someone who's just incredibly optimistic and doesn't let anything bring them down, and those people are harder and harder to find and quite frankly kind of annoying. That yeah, it's definitely, you need those people who are like wanting to make a change and also to just at least acknowledge that there's a problem, because I think ignorance is not always bliss.
No.
So we were just talking a little bit before we started recording that I'd actually read one of your books, The Blade Between, which is a psychological thriller. And I had then we ended up being connected by our mutual friend, Matt Vogel. Shout out to my other podcast, I Like Wrestling. If you're interested in that, check out my links below. So tell me a little bit about what it's like to write a more psychological thriller, not to pigeonhole you into a genre, but to deviate a little bit more away from that sci-fi lens and to get more into that. Even though it's not by the book by any means. And there's a lot of fun twists and turns that I won't spoil. But what was it like for that writing process and to get into that?
I mean, it was super fun. Everything I read is super fun. If it's not super fun, I probably stop pretty
Right.
early on. I love horror. I love dark thrillers. I love dark fantasy. I love Stephen King. I love
You do, yeah.
stories about towns with a secret. So to sort of like really dig in for a minute instead of like, short stories are fun, but really getting into the meat of what it means to tell a horror story was really fun and exciting and grisly in a beautiful way. So I mean, it's someone pointed out that Blackfish City is a futuristic cyberpunk science fiction novel, and The Blade Between is a contemporary horror, but they're both about whales and the housing crisis. So
Yeah.
it's just a different way that I'm stressing out about the same things that always stress me out.
Yeah. Do they just manifest in different ways? And that kind of shows you're a true auteur as well. You're creating this for yourself. So I think that's a good thing. What
Thank you.
advice do you have for aspiring authors?
Read a lot, read all the things, there's so much great stuff out there. There's so much bad stuff out there, and the difference between the good and the bad is subjective. So like read all the things, find out what you love and what excites you, and what doesn't, and find out what's happening at the moment, and connected to that, find your community. Get involved in a writers group, go to a workshop, or take classes if you're able to. Community is everything, and has made me the writer that I am. So to whatever extent possible, find the people who write like you, who are in your genre and who care about the same things as you, and connect with them, learn from them, beta read them, give them critiques, get critiques from them. Like, being a writer means holding two contradictory things in your head at once. One is like, I'm amazing. I'm so amazing that trees should be cut down to put my words on them. And the other is like, I'm not so great, or I have a long way to go. Like, I have a lot to learn. So a key to that is like being in community with other writers who can say like, yeah, you're amazing, and here's where you need to work more. Gotcha. Or here's, yeah, this story is great, except for this part that's terrible. So yeah, community, reading, and like, put your stuff out there, submit it, get rejections, learn to love rejections, like put your stuff out there, and be okay with the fact that the universe might say no, because the universe is going to say no a lot before it says yes.
Why do you like to read?
I like to read because it's magic. It's like, somebody put their feelings and thoughts into a rectangle, and then they share. Then you too can have those thoughts and feelings. So it's like a supernatural thing, and that can span centuries and millennia. So I mean, it's also fun. It's also pleasurable. It makes me feel, good. More and more, I feel like justice is something that I think about a lot, but also in many ways, I think that justice is a fiction, right? That justice doesn't exist in the real world. That there can be no, the guilty can be punished, but they're usually not, and the innocent can be, the people who've been harmed can get, can't be healed in any kind of meaningful way. So like, justice is a fiction, and stories can give us justice. Stories, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, whether they're movies or books or plays or opera, can give us a sense of justice, and a sense that the guilty will be punished and the innocent and the harmed will be redeemed, and our suffering means something. And the actual world doesn't give us that. Sometimes it gives us approximations of that, but it doesn't give you resolution. It doesn't give you like closure. So yeah, it's not a happy ending, a just ending. That's the illusion that fiction can give you.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. I know we both have quite a busy day today, so I'll let us both get back to our day jobs. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, and shout out again to Matt Vogel for connecting us. We will link your books and your information below. And until next time, everyone, stay reading.
Thank you so much.